Charlie Roumeliotis of NBC Sports Chicago, Blackhawks Talk podcast. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's going on, man? Dude, first off, I want to apologize for my little background setup here. I'm at my parents' house and I just got a bunch of storage in my dad's office. So I don't have the same setup as you do. Got a couple Stanley Cups in the background.
Yeah.
Look at that. You got a nice setup over there. So
I
first
try.
off, apologies on my background, but second off, it's good to join you. I know we've been talking about doing this for a couple weeks now, so it's nice to finally chat.
Yeah, it's cool to have you on, but yeah, no worries about the background. I try to make my background look somewhat appeasing or something, so I try. It's my living room, as you can see, but yeah, I decided to put some props up here. The little Stanley Cups and the Cubs wine bottle from the World Series for back when they were actually good. I was actually just watching that game a little bit, but yeah, speaking of championships and things like that, the first question I have for you that everybody, of course, would want to know, and I saw you posted it on Twitter, but your Stanley Cup prediction, you have the Avalanche, right?
I do. This was tough. I can't remember the last Stanley Cup final that it really felt like these were the two best teams in hockey all year long, right? Or maybe not all year long, but it was like Colorado went in as the favorite, and then Tampa is coming out off that two-time defending Stanley Cup champion. So it was like, to beat the best, you got to beat the best, right? So it literally felt like best team in the East, best team in the West. And Will, I can't remember the last time we had that. And I mentioned this on my podcast the other day too. It's just like in years past, it was like Tampa and Dallas, Tampa and Montreal. There was always some sort of discrepancy between the two teams where you're like, well, that team is very clearly better than the other team, right? This year, it's pretty even match. And obviously it was a really fun game one, and I think I'm going to be disappointed if we don't get a 7-game series, right? This feels like two heavyweights going at it, and I do have Colorado in 7, but really tough to pick against Tampa and their pedigree.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny because, of course, I'm wearing this Blue Jacket shirt back when Torts had his famous locker room speech. I think it was in the middle of between the first and second period of the game one when they're down 3-0 and they came back and won. And the Blue Jackets are the last team to knock the Lightning out of the playoffs 3 years ago, of course. And until last series against the Rangers, they had a 2-0 deficit since that time. So all playoffs, and I did the NHL bracket, NHL.com's playoff bracket. So of course my final was Tampa Bay. And I don't know what the games I did, but I'm saying Tampa Bay in 6 now over Colorado.
Yeah.
So I was actually pretty near perfect in that entire bracket. A couple of teams like the Flames kind of I did not have Edmonton doing much, and then they ended up, going against Colorado. But with Tampa Bay, it's crazy because obviously they can win 3 in a row. I think it's obviously impressive what they have done the last 2 years, obviously. And I know it wasn't the full 82-game season the last 2 years. So some people might say, yeah, it wasn't a full season, but that's out of their control. But also it's they still had to deal with the weird bubble situation and just the uncertainty of all that. So it's just crazy. Let's see a team win 3 in a row, or potentially win 3 in a row anyway.
Yeah, I think the thing that Tampa maybe has in their favor, and again, like you said, we're not necessarily discrediting their 2 Stanley Cups at all, but it wasn't a typical 82-game season, deep playoff run, short summer, 82-game playoff or season, deep playoff run, short summer, right? They had that little break where it was, I don't even know if you should call it a break because it was COVID hit. And so everyone was just in lockdown. So it was just no one was on the ice for several months. And then they do win that Stanley Cup in the bubble. But then it was a 56-game schedule in the next season, right? So it was maybe a little bit easier on their bodies, taxing wise, and also there was no travel. It was basically baseball series, right? There was very little travel, so it wasn't like guys were getting home at really late and then they had a game the next day. It wasn't as taxing. So I think it's nice to see Tampa go on this deep playoff run in a normal schedule because it's kind of validating the fact that okay, they are a very good team and we're seeing it. But as far as if they win the Stanley Cup and they three-peat, there definitely is some sort of, it wasn't a typical 3 really deep playoff runs, short summer. There were just some underlying factors in it, but I still don't think it discredits Tampa as a team because I feel like they are still you can put up this run against any of Chicago, Pittsburgh, talk about any of the cap era teams. Tampa is right up there with future Hall of Famers on their team.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was thinking the same thing as you mentioned about like the off season or like they're probably not as taxed as they would be if it was 82 games every single season, the deep playoff runs, but still very impressive what they're doing. And like you said, the Colorado Avalanche have been so close. They're finally there. They took game one. I've just been so honestly, it goes back to probably back last few weeks of April when Tampa Bay was playing Columbus, and I was seeing those games up close, and I'm thinking, man, Kucherov's on fire right now. This team is just, they're coming, and they've been great all year, even though they were like third place in their division, I think, because of Florida and teams like that playing very well in Toronto. But I was like, come playoff time, I trust teams like Tampa over the Panthers. I didn't really trust Toronto all that much, even though they're both very good and loaded in their own right. But with Tampa, it's just like you said, it's hard to count out what they're doing. And then the Avalanche, I think it's just, for me, it comes down to the goaltending, and we'll see if Vasilevsky in Tampa does what he's been doing, really. But yeah, Colorado is
Yeah.
just as stacked and could very well do it. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they did.
Right. I think it was pretty easy to kind of pick Colorado in the West because they're very clearly the better team, basically in that conference all year long. And you felt like they were coming in the year with a big chip on their shoulder, right? Like they were so determined to like, all right, we don't care about first, second round. Like we are going for the Stanley Cup, right? It felt like it was different in the East where you had Tampa, you had Florida that was the number one seed. You had, I mean, you could go 1 through 8, and it felt like all 8 teams really legitimately had a shot to win or go on a deep playoff run. The one team I will say, and they're probably the ones sitting at home right now just kicking themselves, is Toronto. Like I was actually riding the Leafs bandwagon all season long. Like you look at any of the metrics, underlying analytics of, shot shares, scoring chances, expected goals, like all of it at 5-on-5, like Toronto was like top 5 in almost every statistical category. And they had like top 5 goal, bottom 5 goaltending basically from December and on. Like it was so bad that and they still put up historically good numbers. So I had, like, going into this playoffs, I had the winner of the Tampa Toronto series going to the Stanley Cup, and so obviously it ended up being Tampa. But like Toronto, like they probably gave Tampa the biggest fits out of any team that they faced in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And basically like going up 3-2 in the series, and then Tampa lost Braden Point. Like it was so there for Toronto to take. And Toronto low-key might be my Stanley Cup pick next year, like if they can get everything situated. But that's the one series that like Tampa-Toronto really felt like the Eastern Conference Final. And it's unfortunate we got that in the first round. But yeah, the fact that Tampa got out of Toronto and then kind of went on this little run, it was like, all right, well, who's beating Tampa? Because, I don't really see anyone beating Tampa outside of Colorado, which is on the other side of the bracket.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's funny. I was talking with Dan Schulman, of course, from ESPN and Sportsnet, and he's a Leafs fan. So I was like, maybe the Leafs will win one of these cups. And he was like, they might win it all. They might get bounced in the first round. And sure enough, Tampa took them out in the first round. But I remember
I actually had them. Toronto was my Stanley Cup pick this year. I had them Toronto over Colorado. So it would have been cool to see Colorado and Toronto actually clash, because it's like, all right, these are like two high-powered offenses. It would have probably been entertaining too from a fan standpoint. Like you got like a top Canadian market versus the Colorado Avalanche, who are just a juggernaut. But I don't think hockey fans are complaining that we get Colorado Tampa either, because it feels like this is going to be a real entertaining series the rest of the way.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like what the Lightning, they've gotten off to, the Leafs beat them 5-0 in game 1. The Rangers went up 2-0. Now, I mean, Florida, they just took care of Florida easily enough, but it's like they're kind of used to, I guess, obviously having their backs against the wall. So, and the way I look at it too, it's hard to go up 2-0 on anyone, especially in the final. So I'm thinking, okay, they're probably going to split the first 2 on the road anyway. So we'll see if they win tomorrow. Even if they go down 0-2, I'm thinking, I'm not counting the Lightning out. They're going back home. We saw it last series. Even last series, I said down 2-0, they're still going to win the series. They did it in 6. So, we'll see what happens. But again, the Avalanche, the only thing that'll surprise me is if this series is like 5 games. I did say I'd pick Tampa in 6, but if it's like 5 games or 4 games, I'll be very surprised.
We'll be very disappointed. Last thing I'll say about this is, like, Tampa compared to the New York Rangers series, where the New York Rangers obviously took a 2-0 series lead, and then they actually had obviously a 2-0 lead in game 3. So like they had Tampa on the ropes. The one thing I will say that's different from New York versus Colorado is that Colorado is a supremely gifted 5-on-5 team, right? Like the Rangers were very good special teams, like obviously have elite goaltending. Their power play was just unreal this postseason. Colorado's going to make you pay at 5-on-5 and on special teams, right? So like, I don't think Tampa is going to be able to get away with kind of playing, like an even 5-on-5 game and like the special teams battle, right? Like it feels like Colorado can come at you in so many different ways. And obviously the goaltending is probably going to be the one area where Tampa has the significant advantage of, right? So like they're going to need maybe Vasilevsky to steal a couple games if Colorado does take a 2-0 series lead and they got to get back into this series somehow.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with the goaltending aspect of things. It'll be interesting to see if the Avalanche don't win, what they end up doing in the offseason, how they address whatever it is, goaltending or what. And, one last thing before we kind of shift to the Blackhawks, of course. Yeah, it's like I think about teams like the Avalanche, if they don't, like, whether or not they win or not. As of right now, it's like they're obviously maybe the best team in hockey. They're so close. You can look at teams like Vegas last couple years or whoever, and you think this team is so good, they're going to get it done. But then I always think about the Sharks, how good they were for so long, and then they never could win it. They got there, but they couldn't do it. So you just never know. You just have to make it happen when you have that opportunity.
Yeah, I think the difference between like maybe Colorado and Vegas and San Jose, and not to discredit your argument because it's a fair argument, right? Like Carolina Hurricanes are another example. Like they've been really good for a while now, and it's like, are they ever going to get it done? So like where I would lump Carolina and Vegas and maybe even San Jose into that category is that it doesn't feel like they have a ton of game breakers, right? Like Colorado has a lot of those. They have Cale Makar, Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen. Those guys can like literally take control of a game. It always felt like in years past, Vegas specifically, they don't have a guy that could really be like, like they have like Vegas specifically, and even Carolina actually, they have 4 lines that come at you in waves, right? And they have 3 defenseman pairings that are really, really good. But they don't have that, like the Patrick Kane's, the guy that can like just take over a series, just like hop on my back, right? I think that's a big reason why Vegas went out and got Jack Eichel, because they're like, wait, we need someone to kind of strap the team on our back when we're looking for a goal. Like it felt like they didn't really have anyone to kind of lean on. And same for Colorado, or same for Carolina. They have so many good players, Sebastian Aho and Andrei Svechnikov, like all these like very talented players, but they're not like game-breaking type offensive players that can, make and Sebastian Aho is probably the closest to that player, to being that guy for Carolina. But it's not, they're not like Nathan McKinnon or Connor McDavid, like those types of players. So I think that's where Colorado might separate themselves. Like they have so many of those guys on their roster that if they're having a bad night, like Cale Makar can just make one play in the blink of an eye, or McKinnon can do the same. And it's just like, well, the game just turned.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And yeah, Cal McCarr, dude, that guy is insane. It's hard to imagine a guy like a defenseman like that putting up points like that. Is just insane.
It's crazy. It was like they were listing kind of like at the beginning of the playoffs of like points per game among defensemen in the playoffs. It was like minimum of like 30 games, and it's like Bobby Orr, Paul Coffey, Cal McCarr. It's like just that those are like the best of the best. Like he is historically good. So yeah, he's on an incredible trajectory, and I know it's really, really early, but like if he could be a multiple Norris Trophy winner, and also I wouldn't be surprised if he won a Hart Trophy here or there, as well. Like that's how good he is.
Definitely. So shifting to the Blackhawks, the team that you obviously cover the most. So I'm curious, with the NHL Draft coming up in July, what are some of the names that you're hearing that you think this team might target based on need? And they have a lot of things, obviously, to have to address. But what are kind of the names, or who you think they might be after next month?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question because the Blackhawks currently don't have a first-round pick in this year's draft because of the Seth Jones trade. A shout-out to Columbus to your shirt. And so, I do think Kyle Davidson is going to be actively looking to try to get into the first round this season, right? And obviously we know that they're kind of declaring a rebuild, and it feels like it's going to be a longer term rebuild, not necessarily a retool on the fly like they've maybe done in years past. So they're going to be a little bit more patient with this rebuild. And there are only a couple guys that really stand out to me as guys that maybe have value on the Blackhawks, and it's Alex DeBrincat and Connor Murphy I would maybe throw in there as well. But then it's Patrick Kane, right? And he has a full no movement clause. So I think the interesting storyline for us in Chicago over these next few weeks is going to be what the Blackhawks do with Alex DeBrincat. Because if DeBrincat gets moved, the Blackhawks are probably going to be able to get a pretty significant haul for him. And then that can maybe speed up. Okay, they can get a first round pick in this year's draft. They can maybe get a prospect or two, maybe another first rounder next year, however the package might look like. And then maybe we're having a different discussion of, okay, now suddenly the Blackhawks went from not having a first round pick to, hey, they have a top 10 pick in this year's NHL draft. Now we can start looking at those pool of players. And the one team that I kind of threw out there ever since DeBrincat's name has been in the trade rumors is New Jersey. Like, it makes so much sense for New Jersey Devils to go after a guy like DeBrincat to play alongside Jack Hughes for the next 10 years because they don't really have a winger for Jack Hughes. And New Jersey's they basically check all three boxes. Like, they got the cap space, got like more than $25 million in cap space to afford him. They got a pretty good prospect pool. I think they're like top 5 in the NHL. And then they also have a high first round pick this year, the number 2 overall pick, which they're open to trading, right? So that fits that fits everything the Blackhawks might be looking for in a potential package. The only thing I will say is they might make a significant run at Johnny Gaudreau, and I think that might be their priority first because they wouldn't have to give up assets for him. But if they miss out on maybe those sweepstakes, maybe they might look to that secondary market of like, okay, we got to go get the next best available guy, maybe via trade, and that might be Alex DeBrincat, or it could be David Pastrnak from Boston, because I saw a report out there that if he's not satisfied with Boston's direction, then he might want to ask for a trade. So I think DeBrincat, New Jersey makes a lot of sense. So we'll see what these next few weeks kind of present.
Yeah, they get in the first round, like you said. They don't have their first round pick, so I could see maybe them trying to trade up, and if it's a guy like DeBrincat, obviously bringing back a haul. Yeah, as far as like a guy like DeBrincat, so obviously he's an RFA after 22-23, right? So
Yep.
obviously you'd have to pay him as an RFA, but you could still have him. But is he a guy like? Do you think personally they would be better off trying to build around him, or he's 24, let's trade him, let's get that haul back, because this team needs to make mass changes as much as bring in as much as they can, or like, because basically you're thinking, okay, we already know what the DeBrincat might be and what he could still be, or do we get prospects back that's a haul and hope that maybe one of them turns out to be the DeBrincat or better, you know what I mean? So
Right.
what do you think might be the best
Nope.
in their best interests?
For sure. It's a valid argument too, because I could see the other side. I think from Chicago's point of view is they're probably looking at this like the Blackhawks are not going to be perennial Stanley Cup contenders, maybe closer to 5-6 years as opposed to like 2-3. So I think when you're kind of weighing the long-term picture, does it make sense to give DeBrincat this massive deal? And by the time he's 29 years old, he's 24 right now. So by the time he's 29 years old is maybe when the Blackhawks are going to be like really good again, potentially, like maybe best case scenario. So then at that point, the timeline might not be adding up for Chicago. So I think the counter argument to that is you might be better off going to get a player or get some prospects or a draft pick, not necessarily hoping that like he turns into DeBrincat, but I think it's more so the timeline of that player, right? Like, it's like, maybe let's go get an 18-year-old guy so that by the time that prospect or first round pick is 23, 24, 25 years old, then he's ascending right when we're ascending as a team, right? As opposed to DeBrincat maybe at 29, 30, starting to creep into the back nine of his career. So I think that might be the argument for trading DeBrincat as opposed to building around him. Not necessarily, because I do feel like DeBrincat is a guy that you definitely can build around. I don't know if he's a franchise-changing player, but like, he's easily one of the best goal scorers in the National Hockey League ever since he came into the league. And so that's the hardest thing to do in hockey, is put the puck in the back of the net. So there's a lot of value in having a player like that. I just think it's the timelines that maybe that Chicago is wrestling with.
Yeah, definitely.
With maybe getting an 18-year-old as opposed to DeBrincat on the back half of his career by the time the Blackhawks are competitive again.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Like you said, the timeline and just trying to really reset this thing the right way. And potentially that means
Right.
moving DeBrincat. So of course that ripple effect could mean, what happens with Patrick Kane, obviously, who has his own no movement clause, and I mean he's still a very good player, right in those prime years basically. So obviously it's like he's been an iconic Blackhawk. He might probably will go down as the best Blackhawk. But it's kind of like the legacy standpoint, but also he probably wants to win and not really be part of a rebuild. If you get rid of DeBrincat, like, do you think Patrick Kane? I mean, I know it's obviously a loaded question, but do you
Yeah.
think he ultimately ends up being moved at some point, or just goes elsewhere when his contract ends?
Yeah, it was interesting during his exit interviews. He was asked specifically whether working with some of the younger players would be enough to satisfy him during these trying times during the rebuild. And he said, about trying to improve his own game and kind of had this political answer. But towards the very end of his response, he went out of his way to say how much he's enjoyed playing with Alex DeBrincat and basically said, if he's here, it makes it easier for me too, because it's fun to play with him. And so if the Blackhawks do trade Alex DeBrincat, you have to wonder if Patrick Kane's going to say, geez, if he's not going to be here for the rebuild, this feels like we're looking at a longer term project here, not necessarily an LA Kings or a Boston situation where we can kind of reload for 2 years and then get right back at it. So that's going to be that's a tricky question to answer, because I think I think Patrick Kane wants to finish his career with the Blackhawks. I think he wants to wear one sweater. He wants to go down as the greatest Hawk ever, hit every single statistical record, be goals, assists, points leader, whatever it is. I just don't know if the timeline is going to match up with the timeline in his head. And so that might be a question for Patrick to kind of, certainly he's mulling that over this offseason, but going into this coming season, I think Patrick Kane potentially being traded this summer would probably be a bit premature. Like, I think he would play out maybe this coming season, and then maybe at the trade deadline he reassesses the situation, or he just tells the Blackhawks, I'm going to play out my contract, and then we'll circle back when my contract is up. And that would probably be the worst case scenario for the Blackhawks, because you don't want it to get to a John Tavares situation where he's leaving and you just get nothing for him, right? Because even though Patrick Kane is 34 years old, he's still playing at a really high level. And I think he can play at a high level for multiple years to come. I think he's going to play until he's 40 years old. Like, he just loves the game that much. So I'm very high on the Patrick Kane high level years, how many he's got left in him. And so I think that's maybe the more likely scenario, is that he just plays out this season and then just reassesses the situation when his contract ends. So it's going to be fascinating, because I think July 13th, NHL free agency, that's when the Blackhawks and Patrick can sign an extension because it's 1 year out.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's going to get there, right? Like, I think it's going to be hit a point where he just plays out the year and then reevaluates where he's at the end of his contract.
Yeah, then Jonathan Toews is the other one. So I know when I was listening to like the hockey show on ESPN 1000 with Pat Boyle and I think Brian Hanley, they were talking about, they had quotes from Toews back during the season, and he's like, I think I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember specifically, but I just remember there was like a soundbite where Toews, it sounded like he was basically he either said this, it was like, for the first time, I'm starting to wonder about, my future here and what that might look like elsewhere, essentially. So, and he's another one. So, and of course, he had, what was it, like not this past season, of course, but prior, the illness that kept him out and things like that, struggles on the ice. So, what do you think might happen with Toews in his future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Toews is definitely a different situation than Kane, because I think Kane can play for a really long time and still at a very high level. I think Toews he could be better than he was last year. I think he definitely is he's gonna have a bounce back year no matter where he plays next season. I really believe that. The problem is he plays such a different style of hockey than Patrick Kane. Like, Patrick Kane never gets hit. Like, have you ever seen Patrick Kane get hit like big time? I think the last time I could remember is like when Matt Dumba lined him up in the neutral zone. This was like 2016 or 17. Like, Panarin came in to fight him. Like, he doesn't play a physical brand of hockey. Jonathan Toews is different. Like, he's shutting guys down. He's plays this really grueling style. So I just think his body might be worn down, that he might not be able to play until he's like 37, 38, 39 years old. So he's probably looking at this like, I don't know how many years I have left in me. So it feels like it's a foregone conclusion that Jonathan Toews probably won't re-sign with the Blackhawks, right? And I was there actually in that media availability the one that you just referenced with Jonathan Toews. It was actually right after the trade deadline in Anaheim, and there were only a few reporters. I think there were only 3 reporters, and he basically just said like it's never crossed my mind that I would play somewhere else, but it's starting to creep into my mind at the possibility of it. And I don't think he was diminishing the fact that he doesn't want to be here. I think he's just real, like when Brandon Hagel gets traded, Marc-Andre Fleury and some of these guys get traded, he's kind of looking at this like, man, like I thought we were, especially given what last summer's offseason moves, like acquiring Seth Jones and Tyler Johnson and Marc-Andre Fleury, like he probably felt like they were back on the upswing. And now they're kind of going on this lengthy rebuild. So I think he's more so just kind of coming to the realization that like, listen, this might be a while. Like, I don't know how much hockey I have left in me. I've given this organization all I have. Like, it probably will come to a point where he reevaluates at the end of his contract as well. The problem is I just don't think he's worth much on the open market, like as far as trade goes. Yeah. So even if the Blackhawks would want to eat half the salary and Toews would want out, it's still $5.87 million that somebody would have to eat, make room for Jonathan Toews. And it would be, I guess, a team might be more likely to do that, but probably at the trade deadline when they can see like, oh, wow, Toews having a really good year in Chicago during trying it. Like right now, it would be tough for a team to really absorb Jonathan Toews. And for the Blackhawks too, I don't know if you would be getting much if you did that anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So the last question I kind of wanted to, it's actually kind of a long one, but basically I'm kind of curious, like obviously this team, like we've been talking about, is going through a full rebuild, like really just, ripping it apart and trying to fix it up the right way from the ground up. So basically I'm kind of curious, like, I guess thinking about the whole last year, kind of just the thoughts on the direction of the franchise. Obviously you have the off the ice, the Kyle Beach, the victim of the sexual assault scandal that really came out obviously last year. And then this team as their brand, their reputation, they're trying to like, repair that. And then you have they went into the season trying to win. And then of course that didn't work out. They fired, Jeremy Colliton. They bring in Derek King as the coach. Now they have the new GM and Kyle Davidson. Jeff Greenberg has switched from the Cubs to the Blackhawks. So it's like, I think now maybe fans can say, okay, we have some kind of direction. We don't have Stan Bowman here, maybe foot half in trying to win here. And then it's like, what are we doing over here? Do you feel like the vibe around this team, I mean, it might be hard now for fans just to look at and say, yeah, I feel great about this team, but it was probably obviously worse when the scandal was really coming out and we were just finding out all the details. So do you feel like the vibe or the reputation of the team is a little bit better, at least now versus where it was, several months ago?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this was a tough season to cover, really, as a journalist. It felt like I needed a lawyer degree in college to kind of cover this all. And in many cases, I actually felt like underqualified to kind of tackle these situations because it was very hard, even just as a journalist, to kind of balance covering hockey, but realizing that was probably not important at the time. And so, yeah, it was really weird. But I will say this, I think from an on-ice perspective, I think fans definitely appreciate the fact that Kyle Davidson has come out and said, we're going to rebuild. I'm going to be transparent with Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, the fans. And I think fans really appreciate that because I think there was, like you said, there was a lot of tug of war going on under the old regime with Stan Bowman. Like one year it was, hey, we're kind of going through a rebuilding year. And then the other year they're signing Robin Leonard, trading for Andrew Shaw back and signing Calvin DeHaan and like all these different situations. And then, obviously last season they got and trade for Seth Jones. Like there wasn't really a clear direction. Like it felt like some seasons they were going for it. Other seasons they were like, we just want to recoup assets. And so I think the fact that Kyle Davidson, and by the way, Kyle Davidson and Norm McIver, they were obviously together during Kyle Davidson came in as an intern in like 2010 and Norm McIver was obviously around during those Stanley Cup years, but not both of them. Norm McIver kind of got phased out of the management group because he actually wanted a rebuild. Like he felt like the Blackhawks should have started their rebuild in 2018, and that kind of got nixed by the upper management. So I think the fact that Kyle has brought back Norm McIver, it's kind of like, all right, we're finally undergoing this rebuild that we should have done in 2018, right? So I think fans appreciate the transparency. I will say though, there is a lot of discrepancy, and there is like if Alex DeBrincat is traded, like there are not going to be a lot of fans that say, "Great, we're tearing this thing into the ground." Like they're going to be like, Alex DeBrincat should be a guy you build around, right? So there is still going to be some disagreement on how the Blackhawks get to being perennial Stanley Cup contenders again, but I think there's an overall sense of like, all right, there's some sort of direction here. We know what the plan is moving forward. We don't have to go into season saying, are we competing again? Like, are we going to playoff teams? Like, what's going on here? So I think that's more so what the fans in the end appreciate about Kyle Davidson's direction.
For the head coaching vacancy, do you think Derek King could be that guy long term, or are they trying to go after someone more established? I don't know if it's Barry Trotz, but I'm just throwing that name out there, or just names like that. Who do you think they might tab as the head coach?
Yeah, it sounds like Derek King is still going to have a pretty he's still a solid candidate, potential candidate to get the permanent gig. The one thing I will say, we had Kyle Davidson on our pregame show, the last pregame show of the season, and he said we're not looking at any stopgap options. Like we're not looking at a Dennis Savard, and then when the Blackhawks are ready to compete again, we're going to go try to find our Joel Quenneville, right? He wants a guy that can grow with the team, but then when the Blackhawks are good again, he would like that coach to still be in place. The challenge might be is we've seen Detroit kind of go through this rebuild, and Jeff Blashill was there for 7 years during the rebuilding season, and he never got to see it through, right? So I don't know. There is a shelf life for NHL head coaches. That shelf life is getting shorter and shorter historically. So I just don't know if it's going to be feasible for the Blackhawks to find a coach that is here for, 4 or 5 of the rebuilding years, and then when they're ready to compete again, like that coach will be the coach for the back half of it as well. Like that would be a tall order, but I think that's what the Blackhawks are trying to identify. So I think while Derek King is certainly a potential candidate, I think they would want to go for a guy that would be here for the long haul. So I think they're looking at more of like assistant coaches that maybe haven't been head coaches at the NHL level yet, that wouldn't like necessarily like a Barry Trotz. Like it's gonna be a bidding war for his services. And so like I know you just threw out Barry Trotz, but like let's just say like Paul Maurice or something, like a guy that's maybe not an elite level coach, but definitely a higher profile name. I think guys like that are probably just going to sit on the sidelines and wait for better opportunities to come up. Yeah. So I think the Blackhawks are going to have to go to their third, fourth level layers and maybe try to find the next Jay Woodcroft or the next Sheldon Keefe or the next John Cooper, where it's like you're getting a guy that hadn't been a head coach in the National Hockey League yet, but he can be a really good one day. So I think that's what they might target. I know a few names. Todd Reardon, Luke Richardson, and Brad Shaw are 3 of Columbus that you obviously know. So like I believe those 3 are have gotten interviews or are part of their candidate list. So that kind of just gives you a little bit of a sense of the profile that they might be targeting. And Todd Reardon obviously was an NHL head coach, but he hasn't been a head coach long enough for him to be a really hot commodity, right? So and then Jim Montgomery I would throw in there as well. I think he's been interviewing like with Vegas and some other teams. I think he's a really good head coach. He obviously comes with some baggage, but guys like that understand the developmental aspect of it, but also might be pretty good head coaches when the Blackhawks are contenders again.
In your estimation, was Jeremy Colliton a better coach than the results bear, or was he just not a good coach? Like, would he not be a head coach again, basically, in your mind?
So this is an unpopular opinion, and I don't mind if fans really come at me for this. I think Jeremy Colliton is I think he's a good coach. I think the problem is he got put into a terrible situation. Yeah. Like when Joel Quenneville got fired, first of all, you're replacing a Hall of Famer, second winningest coach of all time. So like he was never going to live up to that from the fan base. And 2, he came into a situation where like I think Jeremy Colliton would actually be a really good coach for a rebuild. Because he's good with the younger players, communicates. He and you can look at anywhere he's gone. Rockford, he turned around the Blackhawks franchise in 1 year, like had them playing higher than they were actually capable of. And then in Sweden, he got Mora like promoted to the upper league, so like he's been a really successful head coach. I just think it was a terrible situation for him in Chicago from the get-go, where they were trying. He's walking into a locker room with guys that have 3 Stanley Cups: Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, Corey Crawford, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, like all those guys are looking at him like, what does this guy know that, you know what I mean? Like, so it
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
probably really hard for him to really establish that respect in the locker room. But I think if he does get another shot, it's probably going to be as an assistant head coach. I think he's a really good power play specialist. Like that would be like if I'm a team that needs help on my power play, I would hire Jeremy Colliton. And I think he would need to kind of just network within the NHL head coaching or NHL coaching base, and then eventually he'll get another job in the future. And not to compare Jeremy to like Mike Sullivan, but like Mike Sullivan went through a stretch where he was the head coach in Boston, and he didn't get another head coaching job for like 15 years after that. So you imagine Jeremy's probably going to use this time to really kind of self-reflect and grow as a coach from it. So I wouldn't discount him potentially being a good coach for another team in the future. I just think it might take a while for him to get that next opportunity as a permanent or head bench boss.
Yeah, I was really curious about that, so I was glad to ask you that. But yeah, Charlie, thanks for coming on. Really great talking with you. Had a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have to do it again in the near future, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it again soon. Thanks for having me, and have a good rest of your weekend.